So far in this course, we've learned that biologists love to classify living things into groups, so that it's easy for us to understand how life is related to each other. All living things are classified into their groups based on the similarities and differences. In past lessons, we learned there's a complex hierarchy that arranges all living things from their species up to their genus, their family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain, and then ending in all living things. So to give a quick reminder, let's look at cats and dogs. Cats and dogs are both living things. They are made of cells with a nucleus, so they're part of the eukaryote domain. They're both animals, so they're part of kingdom Animalia, and we're going to come back and look at this later. They have a backbone, so they're part of Chordata phylum. They are both mammals, so they feed on their young with milk, and they both mainly eat meat, so they're part of the carnivore order. However, they're from different families within that carnivore order. Dogs are from the Canidae family and cats the Felidae. The genus of dogs is Canis, and they share that with their close relatives like wolves and coyotes. Cats share close relatives with other members of the Felis group, so that's like the sandcat and other smallish cats. So today we're going to go right up to the top of the tree. We're going to look at domains and kingdoms. So to start, there are two domains. The eukaryotes, and they have the typical cells that you've probably studied before. So there's a nucleus inside the cell that holds all the DNA information, and there's little specific organelles, such as the mitochondria that, do specific functions. The prokaryotes, on the other hand, they're a little bit simpler. So they don't really have a nucleus. Their DNA and RNA and organelles, they're just kind of floating around inside the cell itself. So as you may have guessed, the eukaryote domain tend to be a little bit more interesting. And within it, we have a number of kingdoms. Remember, kingdoms are just below domains. Included within the kingdoms of eukaryotes, we have plants, animals, and fungi. Now, within the eukaryote domain, there's another kingdom or another couple of kingdoms, and they're usually microorganisms. Sometimes they're all lumped together and they're called protista. Sometimes they're called other things. This is where biology gets a little bit fuzzy. It's not always as black and white as we would like it to be. And the same happens again with the prokaryote domain. So within it, we have the bacteria kingdom, and then sometimes we also include another one called archaea. Sometimes archaea is its own domain. Again, it's a little bit fuzzy. But to keep things simple, let's look at these four kingdoms. So within the eukaryote domain, we have the plant, animal, fungi kingdoms. And then within the prokaryote domain, let's look at the bacteria kingdom. Okay? And ever since you were a baby, you've been taught, flowers and trees are plants, dogs, cats, fish, birds, etc. are animals. But what makes a plant a plant? What makes an animal an animal? Why aren't fungi plants? Well, to put it simply, it comes down to their kingdom, and the kingdoms are arranged based on how they get their food. Let's look into this a little bit more. Plants make their food from the sun. They use a process called photosynthesis, where they get the energy from the sun, and they take a carbon dioxide molecule and they split it up using that energy from the sun. Okay, so when you look at a tree, the leaves are taking energy from the sun and using the carbon from the carbon dioxide to keep growing. Because they don't find or catch their food, they don't need to move, so their cell walls tend to be pretty hard and rigid. And the chemical that allows plants to use sunlight to break down the carbon dioxide is called chlorophyll. This chemical is green, and that's why most plants have some kind of green leaves or greenness to them. Animals, on the other hand, they get their food from eating stuff. They eat things like plants, other animals, or fungi, and they digest it inside of them to get their energy. As you probably already know, this is something we as humans do all the time, and we're animals. We eat other plants, animals, and fungi and break them down in our stomach to get energy and provide us with the building blocks to keep growing. And because animals need to find their food, animals are usually pretty mobile, and they've developed a lot of strange and interesting ways to move around and get their food. Flying insects, running cheetahs, lots of different things. Now, fungi, they get their food from growing on stuff and decomposing it as it goes. So it's not a plant because it doesn't make their food through photosynthesis. It's not an animal either because it doesn't actually eat their food. It decomposes it from the outside. So it doesn't have a stomach or anything like that. Think of a typical fungi. We're familiar with the mushroom. Again, because they grow on their food, they don't move around. They just spread through spores, and they decompose it as they go. However, they don't, because they're not plants, they don't also have the typical plant features like greenness and leaves. Finally, we have bacteria. Remember, bacteria are in a different domain. They're prokaryotes. And because of that, they're very different. Because they're prokaryotes, they don't have the DNA in a nucleus, and it's all just floating around inside of them. They just exist as single cells, but despite that, they have a big impact on the world around us. So some help us digest our food, some help create healthy soils, and some can even harm living things, things like diseases, like food poisoning. In conclusion, we've looked at 4 kingdoms within 2 domains. We've looked at the plant, animal, fungi kingdom inside the eukaryote domain, and we looked at the bacteria kingdom inside the prokaryote domain. So, although classifying things can be a bit blurry, it's very useful for understanding the different kinds of life on Earth and how some key differences indicate how related or unrelated different living things are to each other.